Hey there, and welcome to this forecast for Monday, January 6th through Sunday, January 12th, 2025. I hope you all had a wonderful new year, and there's definitely a lot of exciting stuff to talk about for this week, and I'll even give you kind of a glimpse at some things we can expect from a little bit later on into the year as well. Lots to talk about for this week. We have three or four ingresses to talk about, depending on how you look at it. Mars, Mercury, and the nodes are all changing signs this week, so very exciting stuff. But before we actually talk about that, I did want to talk about a couple things. So one would be Mars. So Mars is one of those planets, as I mentioned, that is changing signs this week. But maybe even more interestingly, as Mars is retrograde, because remember, Mars is still retrograde at the beginning of Leo as we enter this week. Later in the week, Mars will, be continuing to move backward from our perception and enter the last few degrees of Cancer. But as Mars does so and is moving retrograde, Mars is actually getting brighter, and that's because Mars is getting closer to the Earth, and it will reach its opposition, which basically just means Mars will be about as close as it ever gets to Earth on January 16th, I believe. And there's this really cool article. This is on science.nasa.gov. I will include this in the description somewhere. But it's pretty cool. It just shows, it talks about Mars retrograde, and then as Mars is retrograde, later on in the month, Mars will actually be occulted by the moon, and that's what this image is showing. Which is actually more rare than you would think. You would think every time the moon conjoins a planet like Mars, it would do this, right? It would pass directly over it, but that's actually not true. Usually, when the moon is conjunct Mars, it kind of goes like right next to it, side by side. So that is somewhat rare for the moon to pass directly over Mars. So you can see that on January 13th. And I know, again, that is technically outside of the scope of this forecast, but I did just think it was worth mentioning since these things are approaching. And then again, by January 16th, that's when Mars will reach its opposition. So check out this article. There's this pretty sexy image of Mars as well. I'll include that in the link somewhere. But yeah, good to know. So as Mars is getting light, that would suggest that Mars is actually getting stronger. Even though Mars is retrograde, it's getting brighter, it's getting closer, it's getting stronger. And Mars has, of course, been very relevant with that recent Mars-Pluto opposition being exact just last week. So we're still experiencing that as well as we start out this week. So lots of angst, lots of rethinking our plans, desires, our dreams, our ambitions. All of these things are kind of churning and being worked out, and there's a lot of pressure there with that opposition from Pluto. Okay, and then also another thing going on too that has to do with the near future is as we were getting into this week, as I was preparing for this forecast, I was looking ahead to see what is the next big thing. Okay, because right now, as we go throughout this week, the planets are like pretty decently scattered. We do have this Pisces stellium, which actually just happened over last weekend with Moon, Neptune, Saturn, and Venus all in Pisces. Venus is freshly in Pisces, if you recall last week's forecast. So Venus exalted, lots of Pisces planets. But other than that, there's not really a huge grouping as we start out this week. Everything's pretty well scattered, which that gives us the best shot at things being, dare I say, calm. Things being kind of well-bounded, well balanced, well rounded, because when the planets are scattered like this, it suggests that most of us will have a mix of harsh aspects and harmonious aspects. So things can be quote unquote normal when the planets are scattered like this, but that is temporary. And I wanted to show you this chart. So once we get to late February and then go throughout March, that's when most of the planets start to cluster, and they actually cluster around the North Node as well. North Node is a part of that cluster, and so that's where we will also get our next eclipse season, which actually starts with an eclipse in late February, but then continues throughout most of March as well. So this really reminds me of the charts for last April. I believe it was like last April, maybe late March. Last year we had this huge cluster in Aries. I think it was a bit into Pisces as well. more focused on Aries, especially with the nodes being in Aries last spring. So it's in many ways, to me, it's reminiscent of last spring. We get a somewhat similar cluster. It's just a little bit earlier this year than it was last year. But this is unusual. Having such a big cluster during eclipse season, that points to huge changes. I know my life and the lives of many people I know were dramatically changed last April. There were many life events happening, especially for those of us that had major placements in Aries and Libra. So the same thing applies to late February and March. And again, of course, that's not within the scope of this week's forecast, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I think it's good to know about kind of where we headed. I think that is relevant to where we are now. So yeah, just a lot to think about. And this year will only get more intense, especially as we approach kind of like late spring, because in May, June of this year, that's when the outer planets start to change signs. I believe Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus will all change signs in around like May or June of this year. So really big stuff happening this year. Everything really does change. So we're very much on the precipice of that. We're on the cusp of a huge change, like an entire era changing, with all these outer planets ingressing into different signs. So we're not quite there yet, as you can see here, but I think we can all feel it though. This year is going to be very different from anything that we've experienced in a long time, or maybe ever, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, those are kind of the only flash forwards that I wanted to share with you. Other than that, we will kind of get into the day-by-day forecast here. Moon will be transiting technically from Aries through Cancer this week. This is the chart for Monday, January 6th. So you can see we start out the week with Moon kind of early in Aries, and by the end of the week, Moon will enter Cancer. So Moon is entering a region of the zodiac that it does pretty well in. You know, I always say pretty much all the signs between Taurus and Libra, Moon tends to do decently well in. You know, we'll have Moon exalted in Taurus. I consider Moon to be in joy in Gemini, and then in domicile in Cancer, and then Moon does pretty well in Leo, Virgo, Libra as well. So again, we're entering this like pretty harmonious region for the Moon to be in. But before we get there, we have to go through the first quarter moon in Aries, where Moon is a little bit more out of place in Aries, and then it's going to make that 90-degree aspect to the sun early in the week. So really, I would say Monday is going to be the most disruptive day. Monday is going to be the most active day. I actually don't hate this kind of energy for a Monday. I think Monday, it's nice to have a little bit of disruptive energy, a little bit of Mars energy, to get things started, to get things kind of instigated, you know, especially for those of us that do start our weeks on Monday, or, you know, start work or whatever we do. It's good to have that disruptive energy, I think, on a Monday. So that's definitely what we're experiencing here. You can see late in the day, Eastern time, Moon will reach 16 degrees Aries, and then that's where it will make that first quarter 90-degree square to the sun at 16 Capricorn. I would say this is about as volatile as the Moon can possibly be, because Moon is not only in Aries, which is potentially the most volatile sign, but Moon is also making that 90-degree aspect. The first quarter Moon is, I would say, the most volatile part of the lunar cycle, maybe even more so than the full Moon. So again, you know, this is huge time for starting new things, and this is, I think, especially visceral for us since it's the first real week of the year, if you think about it. Like, New Year's Day was halfway through last week, and so, you know, I think this holiday season was kind of weird because Christmas and New Year's were both on Wednesdays, right? So they kind of, I mean, really the last 2 weeks were kind of just a loss, right? I mean, we were focused on the holidays and things like that. So this is the first real week of the year. So what better way to start it with this huge, like, volatile, action-oriented energy? So I'll give you the plus and the minus. This is honestly similar for any quarter moon, but especially first quarter moons, and especially this first quarter moon in Aries. The themes would be, you know, action. So the plus side is, if you need to take action, if you need to try something new, if you need to make a big change, a big move, like if you wanted to move somewhere, if you wanted to get a new job or apply for a new job, if you wanted to start any project, if you wanted to start like a a workout regimen or something, this would be a great time to do so. Really, just to make any kind of change, especially like a physical, like a literal change. This isn't cerebral, psychological necessarily. That could be part of it too, but this is more, it's Aries, it's literal, it's black and white. This is a literal change that we all need to make in some aspect of our lives. Okay, so there's a lot you can do with that energy, but the negative side would be this can be disruptive. We don't always like change. We don't always want to start something new. Maybe we're happy with the way things are, and that can be difficult to accept change if we are in those kind of states of mind. But we have to roll with the punches. This is gonna happen whether you like it or not, and we have 16 degrees Aries in all of our charts. It may look very different depending on your specific chart, but look to 16 Aries to find where the source of this could be a crisis, or just the source of this action. Where is the action needed in your life? That's what 16 Aries will tell you. One more thing about this quarter moon too. This first quarter moon it forms a decently tight conjunction to Chiron. It's only about 3 degrees off, so I think that's definitely within orb. And so I always say, if you've heard me talk about Chiron before in these forecasts, Chiron in Aries is protest energy, and especially if you apply everything I just said, this whole first quarter moon, very active, very volatile, and it's conjunct Chiron, which is just recently direct. So I think because Chiron is recently direct too, there's a lot of like pent up energy there that's ready to spill over, to tip over. So it wouldn't surprise me if around Monday, maybe even give or take a day, wouldn't surprise me if there were some kind of like protests or some kind of volatility in the world. Could be a natural disaster as well. Not that I'm like intending for that or wanting that, but this is a disruptive energy for sure. So okay, other than that, Mars actually changes signs today as well. So Mars retrogrades backward from Leo back into Cancer. And this gets really funky because now Mars will be not only retrograde but also in fall. Mars is debilitated in Cancer. Mars in Cancer is a funny one because it's just out of place. Mars is the god of war. Cancer is the sign of home and family. So having the god of war, in your home and family, that's clearly disruptive, right? That can be there can be a lot more tension surrounding home and family. Again, look to where Cancer, or specifically the last few degrees of Cancer, fall in your chart though, because that shows an area of life that you're kind of rethinking your ambitions. Your ambition is kind of maybe withdrawing a little bit in order for you to process something, and eventually once Mars does turn direct, I believe in February, once Mars turns direct, then we can assert ourselves in a much more confident way. But this is more about this is more like pressurized Mars energy. It's more internalized, and especially with Mars debilitated now, we're really thinking outside the box with what we are ambitious about. We may be more open to making some kind of change or seeing things differently than how we would normally see them. And just to mention too, Mercury is still in Sagittarius, so we do have multiple debilitated planets still, but this will change a couple days later. But just in general, I do think it's interesting how, I don't know, everything is just shifting. Venus is exalted, which is nice for everyone generally, but again, Mars is debilitated now, so we can kind of just take what we can get. Like in some ways, the pleasure is very accessible with Venus and Pisces, but with Mars and Cancer, it's also kind of out of place. But again, I do see this like water theme forming. Now we have 3 planets in Pisces, 1 planet in Cancer. This will be especially brought out whenever the moon transits through a water sign, like it will do later this week. But yeah, I do think it's interesting. Suddenly, the dominant element is water, which is honestly kind of unusual for this time. Sun is only halfway through Capricorn, so usually we have a lot more transits in Capricorn, Sagittarius, Aquarius. A little bit more rare for there to be such a dominance of water themes right now. So lots of emotion, intuition, creativity, lots of feeling that's really ripe right now. Okay, one last thing for Monday too. So Mercury at 27 Sagittarius makes a square to Neptune, which is at 27 Pisces. I think this is particularly interesting because the galactic center actually sits at 27 Sagittarius as well. So not only is Mercury squaring Neptune, it's also conjoining the galactic center. And in a way, both of these aspects are similar. Mercury squaring Neptune as well as conjoining the galactic center. Both of these can suggest learning something new about spirituality, learning something new about metaphysics or mysteries, about the collective consciousness. 27 Sagittarius can trigger awakenings or like paranormal experiences, psychic experiences, spiritual experiences. It may be easier for us to connect to or learn about our higher selves, our past lives. If you are a religious person or a spiritual person, it may be easier to tap into that kind of awareness as well. So yeah, really, it's a really mystical dynamic here. And again, with Mercury debilitated, Mercury in detriment in Sagittarius, we are much more open to strange or unusual perspectives we might not usually be open to. So I think this might be especially strange, and it's a very weird dynamic, but it might be very interesting as well, especially for people like you and me that are interested in astrology and cycles and like self-awareness as well, spirituality, all of that stuff. I think this might be very interesting to look within, or maybe the information could come from outside of us as well, but there may be some kind of intuiting or learning on a really deep metaphysical level. Okay, going to Tuesday, January 7th, Moon continues through Aries, and technically very late in the day, Eastern time, Moon will actually enter Taurus today, but for pretty much most of the day, in most time zones, Moon will be in Aries still. So basically, I think the dominant energy for Tuesday is very similar to Monday. We're basically still dealing with that first quarter moon in Aries. It's basically spilled over from Monday to Tuesday. So for most of us, this energy is not going to be quite as acute as it was on Monday, but it's still very much there. Usually quarter moons you can experience a day or two before, or after. So yeah, that still applies. So in other words, it's still a very excellent day for starting something new, taking action. Both Monday and Tuesday, we might all be kind of riled up. We might be more stressed, but we might also be more motivated, more inspired to take action. Also, a quick side note too. So afternoon Eastern Standard or Eastern Time, whatever. I'm trying not to say Eastern Standard Time, so I don't have to remember the time zones and whatnot, and daylight saving. But anyway, Eastern time, later in the day, Moon trines Mercury. So that's interesting too, considering that Mercury just made those two really wild aspects just only one day before. Now with the Moon making that, that connection, I almost think of it as like a high five, like a trine. Moon and Mercury are making that really happy kind of phone call between the two of them, that really strong connection. So Moon is now kind of agreeing with Mercury and maybe expanding some of the realizations we only had one day before, because Moon is also a very spiritual body. So just the fact that within 2 days Mercury conjoins the galactic center, squares Neptune, and then trines the Moon, huge potential for a spiritual awakening, spiritual awareness, metaphysics, paranormal stuff, etc. Aliens, spirits, angels, whatever. Really interesting stuff there for sure. So yeah, kind of a weird start to the week, honestly, but very active though. Going to Wednesday, January 8th, Moon continues through Taurus, as I said, since it technically entered Taurus late on Tuesday. So this is beautiful for multiple reasons. Number one, Moon is exalted in Taurus. This is, if there is a best sign for the Moon to be in, it's probably Taurus because it's exalted there. So this indicates, it gives us the best shot at being emotionally grounded and stable. I would say Taurus is the most stable sign. So it's no wonder Moon is exalted there. Taurus is simultaneously nurturing and empathetic, but it also has firm boundaries. So that's why Moon tends to do so well there. This is also really great though because as the moon gets deeper into Taurus, it's going to approach a trine to the sun. So, in other words, sun is in an earth sign, moon is in an earth sign. This is really harmonious, and the sun and the moon are even forming kind of sextiles to the Pisces planets as well. So, yeah, really harmonious. Suddenly we have definitely a lot of water in the chart, but we also have a decent amount of earth. Moon is newly in Taurus, but Mercury enters Capricorn today as well. So that's, another earth placement. And honestly, I've been looking forward to this because Mercury retrograded in Sagittarius. I know that was a few weeks ago and we've largely moved on by now, but Mercury has still been in the same sign that it was retrograde until now. So in some ways we've still been dealing with that, going backward, and I think it may have been objectively difficult for many of us because Mercury was not only retrograde, it was retrograde in the sign of its detriment, basically. So a lot of really heavy stuff. It's not like I don't think Mercury in Sagittarius is typically that heavy or difficult. But anyway, so that changes. We are truly moving on. I do think the Sagittarius Capricorn cusp is one of the most major cusps because 0 degrees Capricorn represents the winter solstice. It represents where the daylight starts to return. So in many ways, it really is the start of a new year, a new kind of solar cycle, I guess you could say. So, of course, we're not talking about the sun crossing that point right now. We're talking about Mercury crossing that point, but it's still very impactful because now with Mercury in Capricorn, we're thinking that much more about the future and, goal setting. And again, this is especially true because, Mercury and Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Taurus, these planets are all saying something similar. They're all indicating that we want to be stable, grounded, think about the future. We want to have excellent foresight, and we want to invest right now. We want to invest in ourselves, in our lives, etc. This to me looks like a much more grounded energy than what we were dealing with for Monday and most of Tuesday. So in other words, really fiery, action-oriented start of the week, but then by the time we get to Wednesday, the earth and the water really dominate here. I think it's much heavier, for better or for worse. Some of us may like that or may not like that depending on our charts, but yeah, it's much more deep feeling and grounded. So I think this is generally a very harmonious chart. Lots of trines, sextiles. There's definitely a yin focus here, so it's a huge breath inward. After that, almost like an exhale Monday, Tuesday, and then an inhale on Wednesday, if that makes sense. I forgot. I almost forgot an aspect for Wednesday. So Mercury enters Capricorn. We covered that, but also Sun does square Chiron. So that is the one kind of conflicted energy we have today. So generally things are harmonious. I want to understate that. Overstate? Underline? I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. I want to emphasize that one more time. But with Sun squaring Chiron, I just want to say, yes, it is a square. Aries Capricorn squares can be very tense. But keep in mind, Chiron is... I don't give Chiron as much weight as I do the rest of the planets. I do talk about it in these forecasts because I do think it does have tangible effects for us, for sure. But just know that I think overall things are harmonious. However, with that square between Sun and Chiron, there is that potential for protests to emerge or other kinds of like civil unrest or maybe natural events as well. There is that chance too. But other than that, overall, things are very earthy and watery. Things are heavy, and we're wanting stability. We're choosing stability, I think, in general. Going to Thursday, January 9th, this whole kind of earth-water theme continues. We do have the moon crossing over Uranus, and so that will bring some unpredictability. That could bring unpredictability when it comes to like groups of people or also with the economy as well, since this is happening in Taurus. There is a really strong trine though, so Sun is loosely trining Uranus, and early in the day, looks like very early, like midnight between Wednesday and Thursday, Moon trines the Sun as well. So So there is still this element of harmony there, but there's also this unpredictability with Uranus. So that could provoke some kind of realization or a change of values as well. Changes in the economy, changes in with assets, stocks, maybe investments, things like that. Okay. Very late in the day, Moon will leave Taurus and enter Gemini. And like I said, I think Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, these are probably the three consecutive signs where the Moon tends to do the best in. So we've got good vibes, at least as far as the Moon is concerned. Okay, Friday, January 10th, Moon in Gemini. I think this is very complimentary because, as I mentioned, we've had a lot of water with, 4 planets in water signs. Sun and Mercury are in Capricorn. So it's kind of nice to add a little bit more air to the picture. We are lacking fire, but I always say if you can at least be well rounded in 3 elements, that makes for a pretty well rounded chart, even if you're lacking a fourth element. So yes, we may be kind of lacking that fire this week. Other than Monday and Tuesday, there's fire from that first quarter moon in Aries. But other than that, we may be sort of lacking that fire, that passion, that spark to get things started. So lots of that Monday, Tuesday, but it's lacking the rest of the week. But again, the plus side is we've got a decent amount of earth, we've got a decent amount of water, and then now on Friday and let's just say Friday, with Moon in Gemini. Now we have some air as well. So the air element helps us to not take things so seriously. It helps us to be kind of intellectually nimble and observant as well. I think Moon in Gemini is a very kind of silly placement, but it's also very much focused on learning as well. And especially with Moon approaching Jupiter, that really it indicates we're focused on learning and branching out and having new experiences on Friday. So again, that's a really complementary energy to go with the sturdiness of Sun and Mercury in Capricorn and the goal orientedness, and then also the dreaminess of Neptune, Saturn, Venus in Pisces. Adding this kind of playful, intellectual Gemini energy, I think, is very complementary in my opinion. So yeah, it looks like a kind of fun Friday. So basically, really volatile Monday, Tuesday, more stable Wednesday, Thursday, and then to me it looks like a fun Friday. Also with Moon crossing near Jupiter, it just brings the fun into the picture. I think Gemini is a fun sign, but Jupiter is a very fun planet as well. So it brings that fun, that optimism. Jupiter is retrograde, so it is kind of guarded or careful optimism, but it still is optimism nonetheless. So I think that's really great for a Friday for sure. Saturday, Moon continues through Gemini. It's not conjunct Jupiter anymore, of course, but Moon is still there. So it's a similar environment, similar atmosphere to what we established on Friday. The biggest change, though, is that the nodes change signs today. What's funny, though, is that this chart I'm using, I believe it's astroseek.com. And this chart doesn't show the nodes changing for a while, but I did cross-verify. My notes say the nodes changed today. You can Google it as well. It'll say the nodes change Saturday, January 11th. So I did verify it with multiple sources. I believe the discrepancy is because the position of the nodes, it's a calculated placement. It's an imaginary, like an area in space. And I believe it can be calculated differently. And so I'm thinking that's what the discrepancy is. But if you are someone who watches these charts, I just wanted to explain, if you notice that the nodes are still almost a degree into Aries and Libra, that would be why. Most people would consider the nodes entering Pisces and Virgo today, and I would as well, even though I'm using this site. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, basically, that is a really big deal. The nodes don't change signs very often. The nodes take about a year and a half to move through each sign or each axis. So that's a big deal. Basically, for the last year and a half, Libras and Aries were in the hot seat. If you had any major placements in Aries or Libra, that would represent the area of life that you had changed a lot over the last year and a half, especially during the eclipse seasons, which were generally in fall and spring over the last year and a half. So So if you had Sun, Moon, Rising in Aries or Libra, you probably changed a lot this past year and a half. You've probably grown a lot, learned a lot, maybe changed your life in some dramatic ways. So the good news is for those Aries and Libra people, things should settle down a little bit, generally speaking. Of course, it depends on the rest of your placements as well, but generally, as the nodes leave your sign, things should kind of calm down. You should be a little bit more stable. Um, but on the other hand, Virgo and Pisces, now it's their turn. Now it's our turn, I should say. So again, if you have like Sun, Moon, Rising in Virgo or Pisces, these eclipse seasons for the next year and a half are going to hit you especially strongly. And I would encourage you to look ahead. You could just Google astrology eclipses of 2025. There are multiple good sites that can show you, the exact like degrees of the eclipses for this year. But yeah, maybe just check those out, and or you can ask me. I can do that as well. But yeah, just look ahead and see if you do have any eclipses falling like around your birthday, or any eclipses kind of conjoining any of your placements. But I would say just in general though, if for any of those Virgo and Pisces placements, those show an area or maybe multiple areas of your life where you're going to expect those huge dramatic changes for the next year and a half, especially during the eclipse seasons. Okay, even if the eclipse is nowhere, even if it's just in the same sign as your sun or moon or what have you, that's enough to indicate massive change, learning, soul growth. Nodal energy and eclipse energy, it is very exciting. I always say it's very theatrical. Things feel like a movie, during eclipse season, especially when it's affecting you personally and landing on maybe like a personal placement. So it's very exciting. You can learn so much in such a short time with nodal energy and transits like this. But the downside is that nodal energy is fundamentally unstable. So you'll learn and grow a lot, but by doing so, you become unstable. You're constantly changing, right? So that can be unnerving. Change stresses us out. I used to love change, but the older I get, the more I feel like maybe I'm not actually good at change. Maybe change can be scary for sure. So Virgo and Pisces, those are the areas we can expect the most change for the next year and a half or so, especially going to this chart again. Once we get to late February and then go into March, that's where we're going to get those eclipses, and this huge cluster in Pisces/Aries as well. Of course, it'll be more Pisces in late February, and then it'll move into Aries in March. But yeah, really big stuff coming a little bit later in the year, just a couple months ahead. Really, even just like a month and a half ahead is when the eclipse season starts. So yeah, major changes coming up for sure. But other than that, if I'm being completely honest, it is good to look at the nodes changing. That is definitely a sort of historical landmark. But I don't think this is the type of thing that most of us are going to experience like on Saturday, for example. It's good to know about so that we, follow where the nodes are, but the ingress itself is not going to be something that rocks your world. It's more going to be the eclipse season that happens a little bit later on. Okay, and then lastly, going to Sunday, January 12th. By now, Moon is in Cancer. Moon actually leaves Gemini and enters Cancer right around midnight, like Saturday night, at least Eastern time, of course. So it kind of depends on your time zone. But yeah, so for most of us, basically Sunday we have Moon in Cancer. So of course, Moon is at home in Cancer, so it does very well there. And we tend to be more aware of how we feel with Moon in Cancer, for better or for worse. Moon itself is a neutral planet. It's not a benefic, it's not a malefic. It can be bad or good, it just kind of depends. I did want to say though, there is this huge dominance of the water element that we see again with Neptune, Saturn, Venus, Moon, and Mars all in water signs. Five planets in water signs, so lots of emotion. And I do think water signs can also represent endings. And what's interesting about water signs is that I feel like they can often have to do with periods of isolation. But the water element, because it's the most emotional, it can also bring us together in the most powerful way as well. So you simultaneously have themes of isolation and being alone. soul searching and, meditating, or, just going for like a really long walk, I feel like would be kind of like a water theme. But on the other hand, again, connecting with others, feeling that compassion, that emotion, that sympathy or empathy, or maybe both, um, that would be of the water element as well. Pisces and Cancer are so much about being alone, but they also are so much about connecting with others as well. So both are relevant. That's the best way I could put it. But you can see here, we are gearing up for a full moon. Like at this point on Sunday, moon is going to appear very full in the sky. We don't have the full moon quite yet. That will be part of next week's forecast. I believe it happens on Monday. But we're gearing up for that Sunday. We'll be able to feel that intensity even on Sunday. Moon is very powerful, being not only in domicile but almost full at this point as well. So, super strong moon, lots of water, lots of emotion, lots of heaviness. I think the water element can be intense, but it can also be, at least for me, I think it can be fun on some level to have all that emotion, like to really appreciate some good music, or I don't know, connections with others. That's some good stuff there for sure. Something interesting though, there is an aspect on Sunday. So Mars, which is of course retrograde, and we talked about how Mars is getting brighter. It's almost as close to Earth as it can possibly get at this point. Again, the exact opposition it's called will be January 15th, or I believe January 16th. Or I guess in my notes say the 15th through the 16th are where the opposition happens, where Mars is the brightest and the closest to Earth. So it's pretty much there, but not quite. And the moon is also about to occult Mars as well, but it's not quite there. But what I really wanted to say is Mars at 27 Cancer makes a trine to Neptune at 27 Pisces. Mars Neptune aspects are really funky. Luckily, this is a trine, so trines tend to be very harmonious, even with the weirdest planets involved. They tend to be pretty strong, easy. It's the easiest aspect. Let's just put it that way. But why do I say Mars Neptune aspects are strange? Because Mars is about action, volatility. Thinking or acting before we think. Right? It's about being spontaneous and impulsive. So when you combine that with Neptune, which makes everything foggy and dreamy or dreary, I guess, confusing, but also maybe enlightening. It can just be very confusing. I think combining Mars and Neptune is a really great way to like make an accident happen. So we might be kind of like brash or acting hastily, maybe making mistakes or having like an accident of some sort. But on the other hand, because this is a trine, this may be harmonious. This could bring about. I could see this could bring about like a lot of passion, for instance, a lot of motivation or inspiration, especially with something either creative or maybe something athletic in nature. I could see this being great for certain maybe athletes or artists. What else? Other than that, though, I would just say to proceed with caution. I think we might, going back again to Moon and Cancer, especially being so full, I think we might just there's just so much emotion here, which is great. I think there's a lot of intelligence in emotion. There can be great intuition as well, but it's important to, I think things through and to be especially cautious with an aspect like Mars trine Neptune. So just be careful Sunday. Maybe just chill at home if you can do that. That would honestly be my advice. I think it would be better to, I don't know, to just be in like a very peaceful environment if you can on Sunday. And if you need to make any big decisions, think it through. Check it twice, 3 times, what have you, if you can. Okay, but that's pretty much what I have for you for this week. So kind of a funky week as we start out this year, but I hope this helps you. Otherwise, we've got a full moon next week. Sun enters Aquarius, and we've got those multiple things happening with Mars as well. So thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week.